Welcome to another edition of How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs. Today, my co host, Yvonne Trost, and myself are going to be talking about unlocking love, healing childhood wounds for thriving relationships. This goes for all relationships, but today we're going to focus mostly on intimate relationships. But if you want to stick in any relationship, it's going to apply to all relationships. So let's get started. Hello, Yvonne.
Hi.
All right, so I got my first question for you, and that is how has your understanding of childhood programming and its impact on relationships evolved?
Well, I would say to start, I had no idea that childhood programming had anything to do with relationships. I was unaware about the impact. So, through countless hours of studying and certification in our rapid transformation therapy program, I just learned so much. And now I've learned even more from the greats like Dr. Joe Dispenza and all sorts of scientists. And my fascination with neuroscience and how our childhood programming is locked in our subconscious mind unknowingly, and that by the time that you're 35, it's driving 95% of your behavior. Of course, it's going to impact your relationships and everything else, right? So it has everything to do with relationships. So it's evolved from nothing to knowing it has everything to do with how you present yourself in relationships and who you attract into relationships and why you stay in relationships, maybe that you shouldn't. There's a lot to unpack there. What do you want to
So
know?
yeah, so I want to know. I mean, gosh, there's so much we can talk about on the subject, but in terms of who you attract, who do you typically attract? If you have childhood programming issues that you have not faced and worked on.
You typically attract people that had some kind of similar level of trauma, or you could call it childhood stress. It doesn't have to be big T trauma. It could be somebody else that didn't feel like they were enough because their parents didn't show up to the ball game, or their parents compared them to another student, or there were pressures at school, right, to look and be like other people. So if people have been trying to be a copy of what they're told they should be versus their authentic selves, they usually attract somebody that behaves and thinks similarly.
Yeah. So look, I've heard this for 20, 30 years because I've been in and out of therapy for 3 decades. Some people say you marry the parent that you had the most trauma with because you want to recreate, you want to try to fix it this time. Other people say you marry the the parent who gave you the most trauma because that's what your subconscious mind is used to and it doesn't care. Your subconscious mind doesn't care if you're happy or sad, right? It only cares if you're safe. And so that's why we see a lot of people, if they were in abusive households, what type of relationships do you think they get into as adults? Abusive relationships, because again, that's what they're used to. That's the environment that their subconscious mind can keep them alive in. So really fascinating.
And you might think, oh, well, I've been in bad relationships and we looked nothing alike, or we didn't think the same. We're not necessarily talking about what's on the surface. It's what is in your subconscious and in your limiting beliefs that you might not be aware of and the person you're in the relationship might not be aware of. I think the other thing is you might just attract whoever's there, right? You might just accept. You might feel so low on your self-confidence that you're like, "Oh, well, if anybody answers my call, I'll just say yes and I'll make it work." Right? The old saying of you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. You're just like, "Oh, well, something is better than nothing because I don't want to be alone because when I'm alone, then I'm lonely and I'm not happy with myself. So let me distract myself by just being with whomever walks through my door."
Or the flip side of that, we work with clients who haven't been in a relationship in years and years and years because they're like, their subconscious is saying, there's no one there for me, or I don't deserve anyone. I deserve to be alone and miserable.
Yeah. Yeah, so I say don't just take what you get and not throw a fit. Like, think about what you want. And we're going to talk more about that. But quite often, people don't believe what they want is available to them. And you attract who you are, not who you want to be. So start being the person that you want to attract and then watch the magic happen.
Love it.
Awesome. So, Brad, can you just kind of paint the picture for folks? Can you share a personal experience where you hadn't done the work yet, and you now recognize the influence of your childhood programming on some of your past relationships?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is even though I didn't do the work, I recognized it. So, I mean, I've lost track of time. It had to be between 15 and 20 years ago. I was in marriage counseling. Actually, I was in marriage counseling, but also doing individual therapy because I thought, hey, let's hit it from both angles. And we came across that when my first wife would come to me with something, I would shut down. And the therapist helped me see that it was probably from the relationship I had with my father. When he would hit me or make fun of me, I would shut down. I would go into my shell. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting, right? And I can remember like it was yesterday because I was really excited. Oh, I just learned something about myself. But I didn't have any tools, or I didn't know why. Like I knew the why, but I didn't know what to do with it. So fast forward 10 years, 12 years, I'm in the next marriage and the same shit's happening to me. And I don't like it at all. But I didn't know how to process it and what to do with it. So those thoughts were coming, even though my therapist helped me recognize them on a conscious level. What was driving my behavior was unconscious. And it had all to do with this feeling that something was wrong with me and that I wasn't enough. So I just shut down. Now I know the reason is what the reason was it was causing it back then, and I don't shut down. So yeah, that I think that's the best example I can come up with. It came up in therapy, but we only scratched the surface. That's kind of what I spent in 3 decades of marriage counseling and therapy. We only scratched the surface, and that's why it was so amazing when I went to this 1 3-hour session 2 years ago where everything changed. In 3 hours I got more out of those 3 hours than I did of 3 decades of individual therapy and marriage counseling.
Brad, we're going to give our listeners some solutions later, right, in the call. But how do people know what a healthy relationship looks like and what a destructive relationship looks like? How do they
Well,
know what conflict is healthy or what compromising is healthy and what's not healthy?
yeah, so to begin with, conflict is healthy. If you have no conflict in your relationship, I can remember dating someone after my second divorce and bragging the fact that, oh, she never complains. We don't argue about anything. And someone in my office was like, no, that's not good. And at the time, I didn't realize it, but now I do. Conflict is healthy, whether it's in a business setting or relationship with, Five Dysfunctions of a Team, this amazing business book by Patrick Lencioni talks about great teams have conflict. What is destructive conflict is when it gets personal. When someone gets to you where you are triggered and you fight back and you use personal things, those things used to happen in my relationships. We would go back years, we would call each other names, we would yell each other. That is not healthy conflict. What is healthy conflict, and in a couple of minutes we're going to talk about this phenomenal tool that we've created. What is healthy conflict is processing the conflict together, not bringing in past things, and actually dealing with the situation at hand so that you guys can move closer together. That's healthy conflict. No name calling, no judging, coming from a place of love and just trying to solve the issue at hand, because the issue at hand never is the actual issue at hand. When you have that negative emotion, your brain is in fight or flight. So what is it doing? It's going back to a time in your childhood where you felt similar, and it's saying danger, danger, danger. And it's going to look for that danger and that meaning that you put on that thing 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's bringing it into today's situation. So next time you're in an argument, think about this. It's never about the actual argument. It's how you feel inside of yourself that's driving it. All right. So let me ask you a question, Yvonne. What role does self-love play in building a thriving intimate relationship?
So you guys probably are tired of hearing about self-love from us and everybody else because it's so overused right now. So let's just pause a second. And it's how you value yourself and how you care for yourself. So think of it as like, how do you play the best friend role for yourself? Like, think of a best friend that you really, really love, right? And you're going to be there for them no matter what. and you're going to love them and you're going to help them through everything. That's what we're talking about when we talk about self-love. Like, you know that you're enough just the way you are. You know that you deserve what you want in life. So it plays a huge role in a thriving intimate relationship because you have to fill your own cup full. You have to be able to completely love yourself, because if you give that job away to somebody else, and I can only feel love for myself if Brad loves me, then Brad can take that away. And then I don't have a healthy relationship, because then I become dependent upon something outside of me. So, the best way to have a thriving, intimate relationship is for both individuals to care for each other, but to also fill their own cups full. And they're only giving from the overflow. So, there's no resentment. There's no like, I expect you to do something. And if you don't, it upsets me, right? You have healthy communication. If you don't have self love, which I thought I did, but I actually didn't. You can do things like I did, where I'm just like, well, if Brad really loves me, he's going to know what I want and he's going to know what I like. And if he doesn't, then that must mean he doesn't care. But it had nothing to do with that. I didn't love myself enough to believe that what I wanted was worthy of expressing, and that I could trust the person that I was in the relationship with, right? And that also, no matter what happened, I was going to be okay. Quite often, it's amazing. Like, the people that are in intimate relationships don't feel safe communicating with each other because they're afraid of it's going to trigger fight or flight. And that's what it was for me, right? I did not have enough love to know that I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be full of self love, even if somebody else's love goes away, because they're not ready to meet me where I'm at and they're not willing to grow with me along the way. So, just to kind of summarize, like, in order to have a thriving, intimate relationship, you first have to have a thriving relationship with yourself. So, if you're not quite sure, right? Like, I don't know, I think I love myself. I'm not quite sure. Brad put on the screen there, you can go take the self-love quiz. It only takes 3 minutes. It's 12 questions. bradchandler.com/quiz. And would just ask you some simple questions, right? That maybe you haven't thought about when you think about, do you love yourself? So it plays a critical role. I think it's paramount to have it. And the more you can love yourself, the more abundance you attract to you. Because remember what I said earlier, you attract what you are, not what you want. So if you're full of self-love, you're going to attract somebody else that is full of self-love, and you both can give from overflow, not from like a tit for tat and resentment struggle for worth.
And if you lack self-love, so if you go take the quiz, which I definitely think you should, it only takes 3 minutes. It's going to give you an awareness, and all change begins with awareness. How can you change something that you're not aware of? So you're going to either score extreme self-love, mild self-love, or lack of self-love. Yvonne, if you score lack of self-love, who are you most likely going to go match with as an intimate partner?
Well, either, like you said earlier, you're not going to match with anybody because you don't believe that you're worthy, or you're going to match with somebody else that is lacking self-love. And then that's where you get into that constant struggle, right? For who's doing what for whom, because you're not doing enough for yourself.
Conditional love, right? If you're doing what I want to do, it's going to be good, and I'm going to give you love. If not, I'm not going to, right? So,
Yeah, and like, just add to that, right? So if you want unconditional love from somebody else, you need to learn how to unconditionally love yourself.
and
You
then
have to be what you want to attract. And so that's hard for people to do because we're not used to being our authentic self, or thinking like who we are is good enough. We look in the mirror and we don't look the way we want, or our clothes don't fit the way we want, or we see like the happy Facebook families and we don't have that perfect thing, or we don't have the sex. We're constantly comparing ourselves to things outside of ourselves, which doesn't fuel that self-love and that unconditional love for ourselves. So learn to unconditionally love yourself. You can have goals, right? Like, don't go crazy. Like, don't like hurt yourself by not taking care of your health, but love yourself no matter what. And then that's when you're gonna attract somebody else that can love you no matter what, because they love themselves no matter what.
So if you have two people that lack self-love, it's going to either end up in a codependent relationship where one of the parties is just like, I need this person so much that I'm just going to cave in. I'm going to do whatever that this person wants. And I'm going to lead this kind of like miserable prison, like invisible prison life. Or you can have a marriage where the two people constantly butt heads and there's a lot of fighting and argument. That was most of my relationships, right? um, it doesn't end well. And when you can, Yvonne talked about how when you're dependent on the other person for your love, they can take that away. When you are not dependent on that other person, like Yvonne and I are not depending on each other, we can become, that's when deeper connection actually happens. This is one of the things in life. In the last 3 years, I've learned more things that were like, oh my gosh, that's really how life works. How life really works is when you give up that need for your spouse or your intimate partner, that's when you can actually get closer.
Yeah, and guys, I want you to call BS on us, right? So we're not perfect. We're learning a lot. We're growing a lot. When we first started our relationship, we also were both healing and we had like, well, who's driving to whose house? Right? And it became like a little thing. And then we had to talk about it. And we decided like we can keep thinking about who's doing what and we can hang on to judgment and those insecurities, or we can let go of those things and lean into trust and love. And so, because you go through life so long, constantly fighting for self worth, love from other people, judging who's giving more, resenting if you're giving more than the other person, you have to stop. You have to first fill your own cup and then only give from the overflow and only give what you want to give. And then there doesn't have to be resentment and there doesn't have to be scorekeeping.
So,
So just know it's possible.
and as a human being, like there's no right or wrong. You get to pick whatever relationship you want. Yvonne mentioned a lot of relationships that we've seen and probably that we were in were not safe, right? Is that what you want? Do you want to be in a relationship that's not safe? Isn't the person that you lay in bed with at night, isn't that the one person that you want to be safe with? So if you're not safe with them, that's a huge, huge, huge red flag that one or both of you lack self-love. And if you lack self-love and you have children, I promise you there's no way, no matter how good of a parent you think you are and how attentive you are and how you show up to all the ball games, if you lack self-love, you are definitely negatively affecting your children. So just you get to decide what you get to do. Like I said, it's your life, but I want to be with someone who I feel safe with. And what does that mean? That I can be my authentic self all the time.
Yeah, and like one little you don't even have to go to the quiz yet. Definitely do it, but ask yourself this question. When you get upset about something with the person you're in the relationship with, do you go to that person or do you go to your best girlfriend or your best guy friend? Right? Like who do you go to first? Until my current relationship, it was never the person I was in the relationship with. It was always my best girl, right? Like, "Oh my god, you'll not believe what so and so did. What do you think?" Right? So, ask yourself that and have some humor, have some compassion. It's totally normal. But if you find yourself going to your buddy instead of your intimate partner, there is opportunity for it to get even better. That's all we're saying.
Yeah, and now that you say that, I never thought about that. But with my two marriages, I spent a ton of time talking with friends and family members about the relationship. And now with you, it's directly if there's an issue, we talk about it. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, because that's your person, right?
Should
So
be, yeah.
it's really interesting, and again, this is not about us judging, right? We're just trying to help people and spread the word so everybody can be happier and more connected.
You deserve a deeply connected relationship. If you're in a relationship where there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of judging, your spouse or partner is constantly pissing you off, there is work to be done. If you want a deep connection, I mean, what human being doesn't want a deep connection? I have been in relationships, long-term relationships where there wasn't a deep connection, and I can tell you having a deep connection is so much less stressful, so much more safe, so much more healthy. It's marvelous. So
Well, and Brad even said at the beginning of this call, like, this is the thing that applies to every single relationship. Say you have your best gal or your best guy. and they do something. Well, you go to number 2 and say what, number 1 friend did, right? Or in your family, right? Your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, somebody does something and it upsets you. Well, you go to somebody else in your family and you talk about that and you have the best intention, right? You're seeking advice, but guess what? You're making assumptions and you're quite often taking things personally. So if you haven't read the book, The Four Agreements, it's a super easy read or super listen on Audible. And 2 of the agreements are don't take things personally and don't make assumptions. And if you're not talking to the individual that you have the conflict with, whether that's a person you're in an intimate relationship with, your family or your friend, you have to make assumptions because they're not in the conversation. And humans are terrible at making assumptions. So quite often they're wrong. So cut to the chase and have the direct conversation. We'll send you some information, but start with, it's not your fault. I would say, Brad, it's not your fault, but what you just said, made me feel this way, or maybe I don't even know how I feel yet. I used to want to process, but now I'm just like, okay, I got this sensation in my heart or my soul. It just doesn't feel good. I'm not quite sure why. Can we process this together? But if you start with, it's not your fault, then that takes them off the defense. And then you can be comfortable sharing your authentic feelings because you've already told them it's not their fault. You need help processing, right? And if you're in a relationship with somebody, that's what they should want to do with you.
So that leads into this amazing tool that we created called the Joy Regenerator. And you can get it for free at bradchandler.com/joy. And it is a phenomenal tool that we use, that our clients use, and that can literally change your relationship, change your life. So how does it work? It is a tool where when you feel that negative emotion, Yvonne mentioned if you take things personally. If you take things personally a lot, if you feel disrespected, that's typically a sign of lack of self-love. Not your fault, came from childhood programming. So when you feel this negative emotion, your body goes into fight or flight. It's looking around for the danger. Where is the tiger that's going to jump out of the bush? So what does it do? It goes back to the time where the tiger jumped out of the bush. For most of us, we didn't have tiger jumping out of the bush because we've evolved and we are in safe, societies. So what do? We go back to a time which was unsafe for us or felt unsafe, or we made it unsafe as a child, and we brought that in. So number one, when you feel a negative emotion, you're in fight or flight. So what do? You're in the past. You want to do some deep breathing. 6 seconds in, however long you can go, 4 seconds in, pause for 4 seconds, hold it in, breathe it out. Get present and then identify the emotion. I'm feeling sad. Then give yourself compassion for the emotion. It's okay, Brad, you're feeling sad. Remember, it's a 6-year-old little boy inside you, not the 50-year-old. And then you can start to ask yourself, where did this come from? While you're processing that, you can throw in 3 things you're grateful for. So if this is a disagreement with Yvonne, I'm thinking, I'm grateful that she loves me. I'm grateful that she's my business partner. I'm grateful that she's a good mom. And as I'm processing where this come from, well, why am I sad? She just said something that led me to think she doesn't trust me. So if I'm not trustable, I'm not enough. I'm not enough comes from my childhood. My dad made me feel not enough all the time. Oh, that's where it came from. But I'm not 6 years old needing my love, needing my father's love. And she's not loving me. She is just making me feel like I'm not trusted. So this is when I would go to her. First of all, if she wasn't involved or if this was someone else, that's where I would snap back to joy. After I said, is the thought true? Because the thought always creates the emotion, and the emotion creates an action. I would go to, all right, now I know what the emotion is. What was the original thought that created that? I'm not enough. Well, I know I'm enough now because I've done the work. So I can snap back to joy. If Yvonne's involved, I would go to her and say what she was just saying. Hey, it's not your fault, but what you just did made me feel sad. Can we talk about it so that I might heal and we can become closer as a couple? Because remember, if any person or situation negatively affects you, you get angry, you get sad, you get frustrated, you get disappointed. There's something in you that's not healed. This is a perfect way. This is the perfect way to do it. So go right now if you want to, grab this tool, bradchandler.com/joy. And if you start using it, I promise you it will change your relationships.
Yeah, and I'd say like it's not complicated at all. And if you just remember 2 things, curiosity and compassion. Right? So if you go through our program, you're able to understand more about your childhood programming because we not only talk to your conscious brain, but we work with your subconscious brain, right? Leveraging hypnosis. You can do it in different ways. We found that to be the best way. So when you know where it comes from, you can have greater compassion for yourself and let go of the negative self-talk. So think about it for the other person too. So just like you think of yourself like, okay, I'm feeling hurt. This probably has to do with me as a child. Guess what? The other person is also going through the same thing. We're human beings. We're similar, right? So we say everything that somebody does is a call for love or a show of love. So if you're not feeling love from somebody, it's probably them calling for love because of their childhood pain and their hurt. So my little trick is like if you're in the heat of the moment and you can't remember the darn steps, just look at the other person as if they're a young child
Because
and get
when you're arguing with your spouse or your loved one, it's really 2 6-year-olds in adult bodies yelling at each other or whatever you're doing, cussing or throwing or stomping your feet, whatever you're doing, that's the little 6-year-old in you. And when you can become aware of that, that's when you can start to heal. When you can see that other person that you love as not an adult, but a little 6-year-old hurt child, that's what they are. So you can either fight back and just escalate, or you can put out your hand in love and say, hey, I understand we're struggling. Let's respond in love and not fear and ego. So have Yvonne, have you ever faced challenges in applying the principles you teach in our relationship or your own relationships?
yeah, so
And
guys,
how'd you overcome them?
you know, I always want to make sure that I walk my talk. And so I practiced quite a bit when Brad and I first started going into business. I'm like, is it safe? Like this joy, like you guys are feeling the emotions. And you're like, oh, you're supposed to breathe and then you're supposed to go talk to them. And that's not going to feel natural to start, guys. And it didn't feel natural to me to start either. And when I first started doing it, I'm like, oh God, here I go. The relationship's going to be over. Because in the past, any time that I shared my feelings, it either ended in a fight or flight. Like the gentleman either like fought or he went MIA,
You mean
right?
past relationships has
Past
happened.
relationships. Yeah. So
Yeah.
for me, the challenges that I faced was getting started applying these principles, right? So getting started feeling safe, right? And that's probably because I was still filling my own cup full of self-love. And there probably was a little bit of fear of like, oh, if I do this, I really like this guy, but if I start this conversation, the relationship might be over, right? And so what I had to do is actually apply the principles to love myself, to know that I can't lose, right? If Brad was the one, we're going to work through this conversation. And if he's not the one, then he'll go away and that'll make space to attract somebody else that is the one. So the question was, have you ever faced challenges? Yes. In the beginning, like the first time you do it, the first several times you do it, you might not, but you might feel a little bit nervous. What I would say is that's when you turn up the self-love. You know that you can't lose. The only way you can lose is by not having the conversation, by going and talking to your girlfriend or your boyfriend and never talking to your intimate partner, and then starting the resentment roller coaster, right? And having the highs and lows of the relationship, but never feel like you could trust them. So the challenges can be in just getting started. But what I would say is once you start, that's the other part. You're having to recode your brain, right? In the past, if it always didn't go well, if you use our solutions and it's the right person, every time you do it, it's going to get better and better and better. And why? Because now I know I can trust Brad. Because before you didn't know, right? If you didn't have the conversation, how do you know how it's going to go? So you're actually taking action that's fortifying new thoughts that says, oh, I have a stronger relationship. This guy must be the one, or this gal must be the one. So how I overcame them was just through trusting the process, loving myself, and knowing that I couldn't lose by trusting the process and taking action. So take action, take steps towards what you want and believe it's available to you.
When you have self love, you literally can't lose. whether it's a relationship or a job, because you believe that change is okay and that no matter what happens, you can start over, you can go do something else, you can figure it out. So there's just so many benefits to overcoming the childhood programming that and most of us the childhood programming to some degree is I'm not enough, and that robs you of your self-love. You weren't born with that lack of self-love, so it was learned along the way. So we just take you back and figure out where it was learned, and then it was learned behavior, so you can unlearn it.
Yeah,
So
and what I would say, guys, is I didn't think I had any childhood programming. My childhood's good, and my childhood was good. But guess what? Nothing can be perfect, right? Nothing is perfect. So there's always room for needs to be met. And that's not saying your parents are bad. That's saying perhaps you didn't have as much like of your needs being met, whether it was like you feeling safe and you had attachment and you had security, or feeling like you could be your authentic self. Were you always compared to another kid? Were you always asked to get better grades? Did they always push you to play sports? So even if you think you had an amazing childhood and that you love yourself, take our quiz and see what it says. It might surprise you. And the only thing you have to lose is actually nothing. 3 minutes to perhaps unlocking something that you never believed was possible, which is greater joy.
in deeper relationships and better health and a better leader. I mean, it's everything comes with it. So if you guys want to take the quiz, it's bradchandler.com/quiz. And if you want to download this amazing Joy Regenerator tool, it's bradchandler.com/joy. So 3 takeaways from this podcast that I hope you can go away with. Write these down because they are life-changing. The problems in relationships are never the actual relationship itself. It's the relationship that each individual has with themselves. So if you want to heal and fix a relationship, heal your old wounds from childhood. Second, you fix your relationship by loving yourself, going back and reprogramming those viruses that you created, that you rightfully created as a child. They helped you at the time. They helped you get through a bad situation as a 6-year-old. They gave you hope for a better tomorrow. But at 46 or 36, they usually are super negative. And
One thing I just add to that before you move on. When Brad says you fix your relationships, I think what he really means is you're going to attract the best relationship. And that might be the one you're in, or that might be closing a chapter of one you're in to attract the right one. Right? Because sometimes the one you're in isn't the right one. And if they're not willing to do the growth and they don't want to grow with you, it might mean that that's just not the right one. And you close it with joy and without any judgment, just knowing that you both deserve greater happiness and a stronger relationship. So don't think that it's always you have to like stick in the one you got and fix it no matter what, but do it with an open heart. Try, but then don't feel like you're stuck.
And finally, don't avoid conflict, as it can heal past wounds and bring you closer to your partner. Don't avoid conflict in work situations or team environments either, because it can also grow. You can become closer to your employees, team members, boss, whatever it is. So you can reach us at bradchandler.com. You can specifically reach Yvonne at bradchandler.com email. And we want you to know that if you're struggling or suffering with anything, it doesn't have to be that way. There is a better way, and you deserve amazing joy. You deserve amazing, deeply connected relationships. So if we can help you, reach out. And that concludes another episode of How to Be Happier for Entrepreneurs. And just remember, love does heal all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.